Hello there, and welcome to the Bodybuilding.com podcast. Monday morning, we're here bright, cheerful, and fat adapted.
With our coffee.
I'm the deputy editor, Nick Coleus, alongside Dr. Chrissy Keto Kendall. Today, we are discussing everybody's favorite underground macronutrient,
Fat.
the ketone.
Or the ketone.
The ketone. The ketone is the nutritional equivalent of some legendary experimental music band that you've heard its name. You know, people swear it's the most amazing thing ever, the most amazing thing since sliced bread. You can't have sliced bread.
No, avoid.
But maybe you're a bit scared of the ketone. You're afraid maybe it's not for you, or maybe you're afraid it will make you rethink your very nutritional existence.
Dun, dun, dun.
It sounds important, doesn't it? Our guest is going to be Dr. Dominic D'Agostino from the University of South Florida. Chrissy, can you please tell us a little bit more about
Yeah,
Dom?
so Dom, he's a professor in the Department of Molecular Pharmacology and Physiology at University of South Florida. He is also the senior researcher scientist at the Institute of Human and Machine Cognition. Most of what Dr. D'Agostino's lab focuses on is developing and testing metabolic therapies, including ketogenic diets, ketone esters, ketone supplements, intermittent fasting protocols, and metabolic-based drugs. A lot of his research explores the use of these therapies for a broad range of disorders, and some of what we'll kind of pick his brain about: seizures, neurological disorders, wound healing, muscle wasting, and cancer. A lot of his work is focused on or using animal models, but has also explored, obviously, the effects of ketogenic diets, ketone supplements in human participants as well,
including himself. He's an accomplished athlete who, I don't know if he still does. He once held the record for the highest amount of weight lifted in 24 hours.
Yeah, fascinating guy.
So we actually just spoke with Dr. D'Agostino about an hour and a half ago, and we talked about applications that both ketogenic dieting and, to a lesser degree, fasting and intermittent fasting can have for athletes, medical populations, and even just for normal people. So let's listen to the conversation, shall we? Thanks for being with us.
Hello.
Hello there. Is this...
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Great.
This is Bodybuilding.com calling.
Yeah.
Your delivery is going to be late. I'm sorry. Hi. This is Nick Coleus, Dr. D'Agostino. I'm here with Chrissy Kendall. Very, very. We really appreciate you doing this, especially so early in the morning.
I think it's just early for us.
Feels early.
Yeah. What time are you guys on?
Oh, 8:30, but
Oh, 8:30. Okay.
It's not that bad.
Not bad at all.
Rip you out of bed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And you guys are in Idaho?
We are in Idaho.
Yeah. Okay.
Land of potatoes.
Gotcha.
And trout.
Carb.
Potatoes and trout.
Oh, beautiful trout here. Yeah, I tried to catch one this weekend even, and it did not work out very well.
No.
But anyway, well, so we want to cover a broad range of topics. We've both been spending a lot of time reading up on you. Maybe not. You've been on so many podcasts. I try not to listen to all of them. I'm afraid that I'll discover they asked all the questions I already have.
Right.
But are you fed or fasted at this very moment? That would be my first question.
Yeah, actually, I ate breakfast this morning, so just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So a big bowl of ketos.
I'm fed. What did I have? I had kind of like the run-of-the-mill breakfast I have when I'm kind of, I had to do some teaching early in the morning, so it was real quick. It was like 4 eggs in coconut oil and a can of sardines in olive oil, and my coffee with some Quest coconut oil powder in it.
Nice. Oh, so and now, how do you eat the sardines with that? Do you mix them, put them on the eggs, or are you just eating them right out of the can? Because I'm a big canned fish person myself. I'm always curious how people do it.
Yeah, today I just dumped them right on the eggs. Like I just cooked my eggs kind of over easy, put it on the plate, a pinch of sea salt, a little bit of pepper, and just put them right on the eggs. Last night though, I had a salad and I put it on my salad.
Uh-huh.
So
yeah, they're great for that. Yeah.
Yep.
And do you do that with oysters as well, or do you? Because I used to eat oysters. Oh, I have to eat them a certain way, but I'll just eat those right out of the can all the time now, and it makes my coworkers disgusted.
Yep.
Yeah, we're very similar.
Okay, they're so delicious.
They are, yeah. And I guess, it's foods I never ate growing up, really. So I just kind of stumbled upon them and tried oysters at a restaurant one time. And I was like, yeah, they're not too bad. And then, I started looking at their nutritional content, and I tried them in a can. And I'm kind of picky about what brand I like because they have a particular taste. But yeah, I do like them. They're good travel food too.
Yeah. Have you ever tried fresh smoked oysters? Like,
yeah,
they're very different than in the can, but man,
yeah,
so
yeah,
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
so good.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
so now it would be really easy for us to jump right into ketosis and fasting related topics, but let's start the story a little bit further out. I wanted to get a little bit more about your nutritional life story leading up to this. Like, what were you
Okay.
like as a young person leading into this, and just developing these interests, but also your life history of eating a little bit.
Yeah, I grew up in an Italian family, so pasta was kind of like a staple growing up. Like every Sunday, we'd have all the family over for a big Sunday pasta dinner. And I ate candy and sugary fruit juices and things like that. Probably not so much, as much as the kids do now. If we went out to a fast food restaurant, it was like sort of like a big deal, like we didn't go out as much as the kids do now, probably. But I think my mom tried to cook, pretty much what's considered balanced meals, like a meat, fish, vegetable, and a starch growing up. So I think generally speaking, I had a pretty good diet, but it was not a low carb diet by any means. And I grew up on a potato farm, so on a farm. So, and we grew wheat and potatoes and soybeans and everything. So I always had potatoes like every morning, and it was just right from the backyard, basically. Fried potatoes and eggs were kind of like my staple growing up, or oatmeal and eggs. So carbs were always thought of as like really important. I started mountain biking, I think when I was 13 or 14, and really into that. I even did some racing, and big fan of like Gatorade and Cytomax at the time, and carbing up a lot, 2 or 3 days out even for big events. So really pretty much a carb-centric diet all my life. And until I got into weightlifting, and then I became at least aware of a low carb diet for a body composition alteration effects, in cutting. And it wasn't, obviously not a ketogenic diet, but a carbohydrate restricted diet was on my radar, and it was talked about in some magazines, but I didn't think very favorably of it because I was always under the impression your brain needed 60 to 100 grams of carbs a day, and these like zero carb diets could be dangerous or put you in chronic hypoglycemia, which was not a good state to be in. And I learned more as I got through college, and it eventually ended up as part of my research. So yeah, I guess, going into high school and college, I started experimenting seriously with low carb diets probably in college. And my low carb diet would just be switching out the starch for vegetables, for like steamed vegetables or something like that. And I think it worked pretty well for my purposes, for just getting leaner. And I think I adapted pretty well to a low carb diet, although I did feel I felt like my blood sugar was kind of fluctuating, and I would have periods of lethargy and just foggy headedness. And I just remember being tired, maybe from the calorie deficit too. And it wasn't until I started studying systems physiology and advanced nutrition courses in college that I really started looking into the ketogenic diet. And I did, in passing in one of my classes, realize that it was more of a clinically based diet for seizures, and just put it on the back burner until after my doctoral work in college. I did a postdoctoral fellowship that was funded by the Office of Navy Research, and the project that I was most interested in, that I worked on, was understanding the cellular and molecular mechanisms of oxygen toxicity seizures that were a consequence of breathing high oxygen with a closed circuit rebreather that the special operations guys use, or the Navy SEALs. And in the process of understanding the cellular and molecular mechanism, I realized that, I was really looking at the pharmacology of it, but I realized that it was a brain energy sort of problem. And a glucose, the handling and the transport of glucose to preserve brain energy metabolism. And then I realized that the brain could use ketones, and that fasting was a way to put yourself into a state of ketosis, fasting ketosis, and that blood sugar was low and ketones were high, and then that actually was very effective for managing seizures. And this goes back like 100, even 1,000 of years. And about 90 years ago, fasting was also used to manage seizures, and they developed the ketogenic diet, which mimic the physiological state of fasting. So that's the history behind that is fascinating to me, and I incorporated some of that into my research. I studied biology and nutrition as an undergrad, and then physiology and neuroscience as a PhD student, and it allowed me to bring nutrition back into my research again, which I was pretty excited about because I was mostly focusing on anti-seizure drugs and antioxidant cocktails to prevent oxidative stress. So
interesting hearing you talk about this sort of tension between therapeutic and you as an athlete. Like you kind of go back and forth, and it sounds like you were studying it very much in a clinical perspective for a long time, and then maybe started to realize, okay, maybe as an athlete, there's a place as well. I don't know. That's an interesting tension that you can I don't know that you sort of learn by looking at yourself a little bit there as well.
Yeah, there's so much that we can garner, just by watching other people follow a diet and our own personal experience. I did stumble across a Mike Dancer from Bodybuilding.com, and Mike was an epilepsy patient. He had severe epilepsy, and you guys wrote a story on him. It was like R.I.P., rest in peace, to Ripped. And look it up. Mike
always
Dancer.
with the catchy titles.
I don't remember that headline, but I'm going to take credit for it.
Yeah, this is like, going back at least 5 years ago. And, I connected with Mike, and he had tried every anti-epileptic drug and was going to have brain surgery on his hippocampus to remove an area that may be the locus of the seizure, like generating the seizure. And, I was just getting into this topic, and I said, Mike, maybe give this ketogenic diet a try. Bodybuilders use it, so it's not going to really set you back, so to speak. And he was a natural bodybuilder and wanted to do competitions. I was like, you could use it as part of your cutting. And he did, and I didn't actually get in touch with him until about 3 or 4 months after. But as soon as he implemented it rapidly controlled his seizures. And then we connected a few months later, and he was like, I have not had a seizure. And this was 180 degree from what he was used to. He was kind of stuck at home, bedridden for sometimes, just because his seizures were so bad. And Bodybuilding.com did a big story on him. And then it kind of took off a little bit. Like my research took off because I got more into the literature, and I connected with Johns Hopkins University and the Charlie Foundation. Mm-hmm. And the Charlie Foundation, was a foundation based on the observation of the Hollywood producer. His son Charlie had drug-resistant seizures, and he was made aware of the ketogenic diet only after trying a lot of drugs that had very bad side effects. And because this was such a grossly underutilized metabolic therapy, he was angry and decided to start a foundation. And Meryl Streep was his friend, and she did the movie First Do No Harm, and that brought a lot of attention to the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. And Dateline NBC did a story with Jim and talked about his experience with the diet. And I've connected with Jim and kind of talked on behalf of the Charlie Foundation and different events. And the more kind of I started understanding the science and the application of it, I incorporated it into the government-sponsored research I was doing by studying the ketogenic diet and looking at the mechanisms of the ketogenic diet, but also developing ketone supplementation that could rapidly put someone into therapeutic ketosis, feed the brain specific ratios of ketones, and those ketones can enhance brain energy metabolism under periods in the face of oxidative stress, which would be oxygen, toxicity. And we developed that, did the pharmacokinetic studies on it, did some metabolic work on it, and confirmed that it does work remarkably well for oxygen toxicity in our rat model, which is a pretty good kind of surrogate model for what to expect in humans. And now we're in the position where we've developed lots of different ketone supplements, and we're doing safety studies on them. We're doing kind of pharmacokinetic studies on them. We're looking at a lot of different disorders, including different seizure disorders. We're looking at cancer. So it's interesting that cancer cells use glucose very rapidly, but they don't use ketone bodies efficiently for their energy. We're looking at cancer cachexia, muscle wasting associated with cancer. Sarcopenia is something that we're interested into. And rare disorders like glucose transporter type 1 deficiency syndrome, Angelman syndrome. We have a project, looking at anxiety. And being in a state of ketosis seems to lower levels of anxiety, and it promotes exploratory behavior. We think this has tremendous implications for things like PTSD, or just, anxiety in general, right? And PTSD. So I think that's actually some of the most robust data that we haven't even presented yet. I'll be presenting in Europe next month. But it was unexpected, things that come out of our ketogenic diet research. So as we induce ketosis, we're handling animals and realize they're just much more calm, and we realize, well, maybe we should study this.
That's interesting because when I talk to people about the ketogenic diet, their anxiety level goes up when I bring up the idea of not eating a slice of bread.
Carbs, yeah.
Yeah.
Around here. Anyway.
Well, it's adaptation. The adaptation to the ketogenic diet is really kind of important. And if we talk about sort of, how to implement the diet, the pros and cons, then there'll need to be a discussion about adaptation.
And I want to take a quick step back, especially for those who may have never even heard the words ketogenic diet, or this is completely new to them. For dummies, how would you explain the ketogenic diet? And then what makes it different than, okay, it's a low carb diet, it's a Mediterranean diet, it's a high protein diet. What makes the ketogenic diet such a powerful tool for clinical populations, for individuals with seizures, cancer, some of the diseases you just mentioned?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that gets the term gets thrown around a lot, but it's not properly defined.
Exactly.
So the ketogenic diet, by definition, is a diet that elevates blood ketones. And it's interesting, even a lot of the literature, exercise studies, or even clinical research that is done on the ketogenic diet does not properly measure ketones or even attempt to do so, which is pretty remarkable. They just, set the carbohydrate to a certain threshold and think that you're on a ketogenic diet if you do that. So I would say first and foremost that the ketogenic diet, by definition, is a diet that elevates the ketone levels in your blood. And you could measure urine ketones. You could buy keto sticks at any CVS or Walgreens, right? And it measures the acetoacetate in your urine. And if you do measure in the mild to moderate and high range, you likely do have an elevation of blood ketones, but you don't really know. The gold standard is just to measure your blood ketones with a meter. There's several meters out there. Abbott Labs makes the Precision Extra, which we use, and I have a couple other ones I use personally. But so an elevation of blood ketones is sort of the first thing to focus on. And the ketogenic diet is a low carb, high fat. It's important to recognize that it's a high fat diet that's low carb. And then the protein is more or less adjusted to fit the individual, So for the pediatric population, the protein would be probably like young growing kids, somewhere around just 10 to 12%, maybe up to 15%. And that would be adjusted based on the growth of the child and the management of the seizures. For the fitness community, most of them use what's called a modified ketogenic diet, which would be up to about 20 to 25 grams of percent calories from protein. And that's adequate enough to promote, growth and recovery from workouts. So, but there's a lot of fuzzy guidelines in between. So the clinically based ketogenic diet, there's a 4-to-1, the 3-to-1, the 2-to-1, the modified Atkins diet that Eric Kosoff from Johns Hopkins has been advancing, and for all intents and purposes, for the fitness community, I would say when they talk about the ketogenic diet, they're talking about the modified Atkins diet or the modified ketogenic diet, which is much more liberal in the amount of protein, up to 20 to 25, up to 30% fat or protein. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like almost low for some people in the fitness community that go up to 40 and 50% protein. But for the world of ketogenics, that's kind of a higher protein. So as you increase the protein percentages of the ketogenic diet, it will lower the ketone levels. So protein is gluconeogenic up to a certain point, and it can also stimulate to a smaller degree than carbohydrates, but it can stimulate the release of insulin, which is negatively correlated with ketogenesis, with ketone production. So the adding fiber and fat can help buffer the release of glucose into the bloodstream. So there's some athletes, especially high-performing athletes, that can get up to, 200 grams of protein a day and still be well into ketosis if they're large and active. But it's really the protein level is the variable that needs to be adjusted depending on the clinical scenario and the individual and the athlete.
Okay. And we hear people talk about ketosis as being like pregnancy, basically. Oh, you're keto or you're not. But the way that you're describing it, it sounds like there's a spectrum. It's not necessarily an on-off switch. Or am I wrong in understanding it that way? Which image is more accurate, do you think? Sort of a you are, you aren't, or a whole spectrum?
It's variable. Even for the individual that's on a pretty strict ketogenic diet, his ketones will vary during the day. Like me, for example, I'm 0.5 to 0.6 in some mornings, and then later in the day, my blood beta hydroxybutyrate levels, and then later in the day, I'm about 3 or 4 times higher blood ketone levels. As I get a little bit more hungry, and the fat that I've consumed, maybe in the form of MCT, or if I eat breakfast that morning, will be fueling, beta oxidation in the liver, and it's as your system gets kind of revved up and insulin stays low, you have enhanced fat oxidation, especially in the liver, and the acceleration of fat oxidation will contribute to the production of the generation of acetyl-CoA, which forms into acetoacetate and then generates ketone bodies, primarily beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the most stable form that we measure in the blood. Fasting will put you there. Intermittent fasting, I know, is kind of big in the fitness community, can put you there. I kind of like ketogenic intermittent fasting, where you would sort of fast throughout the day and then eat ketogenic at night. But what a lot of bodybuilders do and fitness athletes do is that they do a modified ketogenic diet that's supplemented. And with that supplemented, I say they'll use coconut oil, or more commonly medium chain triglycerides. So the modified ketogenic diet can elevate your ketones slightly, but if you add a supplement to that in the form of medium chain triglycerides, you can further boost ketone levels, and that can further enhance the efficacy of your diet for whatever purposes you're you're using it for, whether it be the management of seizures or for performance. And I think the advantage to supplementing a more liberal ketogenic diet with something like MCTs is that it's elevating your blood ketone levels, and that's sending energy to your brain. So during periods of hypoglycemia, you're going to have a stress response. You're going to crave glucose. You're going to crave carbs. And if your ketone levels are elevated, that more or less abolishes or significantly attenuates the reactive hypoglycemia that you would otherwise have. And that reactive hypoglycemia will trigger a craving for sugar. It will trigger a sympathoexcitatory response. So your sympathetic nervous system will be activated. Epinephrine will flood your system. You'll start to get shaky, sweaty. So being in a state of ketosis can literally abolish that. And that's something that I had when I followed a low carb, non-ketogenic diet. I would have periods of hypoglycemia where I would literally be shaking, and I would feel it. And so that's the real advantage. One of the major advantages of ketones is that you have physiological resilience against hypoglycemia simply by feeding your brain an alternative energy substrate.
That's absolutely fascinating, because I know a lot of our readers who try to attempt the keto diet, the first few weeks are challenging. And I think that's where you lose a lot of people on the diet, and especially our audience, which is more geared towards performance, what their PR in the gym is going to be. They're more concerned about building size and strength versus, any sort of health benefit. Who cares what your heart and the rest of your body are doing in a few years.
Do you have a specific person in mind here? You sound like you're describing somebody.
The one next to me? No,
No.
Not at all. But that brings me into, because you kind of talked about it, MCT oil, coconut oil, possibly ketone supplements. What advice would you give for someone who is going through the keto adaptation period? How long does that last? And is there any way to get through it faster? Because I think that's where people just fall off and quit.
Yeah, that's a good question, one that I get a lot. So there's different ways to do it, and I think you just kind of have to grit your teeth and get through it. For me, it was a little bit of a process because I didn't fully embrace a ketogenic diet. I was kind of really skeptical about its use for athletics and just general daily use. I probably followed like a low carb paleo approach, that's what you would call it, and then transitioned to a ketogenic diet. So I think I was relatively fat adapted. But so my recommendation would be to lower your carbohydrate intake to under 50 grams per day. And I would reduce protein. Probably the most important thing is to reduce protein down to 1 gram per kilogram per day. I know that sounds pretty extreme.
You're breaking the hearts of all of our readers.
Yeah, but you'll be able to titrate it back in though once your body is making. Right now I'm like at 1.5 grams per kilogram per day, and I would use coconut oil is okay. I use that more for cooking things, but to really get your ketone levels up, you'd want to have an MCT oil. Quest makes the MCT oil powder, or you could get something like caprylic triglyceride, which is the 8-carbon MCT, and essentially like it's split in the liver to produce ketone bodies. So MCTs are transported to the liver via hepatic portal circulation, and because they go right to the liver, they get oxidized very fast, and they're kind of like a very quick burning fat, and because they enhance fat oxidation in the liver so much, it contributes to ketogenesis. And those ketones will help you help your brain sort of manage what you would call glucose withdrawal symptoms that you have. So if your brain it's more than just kind of feeding ketones, because if your brain is used to using glucose as an energy source, even if you supply ketones, there's going to be a little bit of a transition to using that energy source. But having them elevated in your blood, they readily cross the blood-brain barrier, the ketones do, and it will help you power through that glucose withdrawal that your brain's going to have. And most people, if they do it right, they can get through it. It's also important because when you lower your carbohydrates and get on a ketogenic diet, your insulin goes pretty low, and it has a diuretic effect. So you're losing your liver glycogen. You may lose initially some muscle glycogen, but that will come back over time. But the suppression of the hormone insulin contributes to the release of sodium. And so it's important to get a lot of sodium in your diet, probably have soups, low-carb soups or beef broth, something, or bouillon cubes, and make sure you have adequate sodium in your diet and you stay properly hydrated. And because as soon as if you become dehydrated, your blood volume drops and you become lethargic, and you'll have what's called like orthostatic hypotension. You're sitting in a chair and you get up and you feel dizzy, and this happened to me, and it was just a matter of getting more sodium, getting more fluids in the system, and MCTs, and just and making sure that you get a lot of fat. So it's hard for a lot of fitness athletes to start throwing in fat into the diet. Like for years, I ate egg whites, but now, like, I literally will eat a egg yolk omelet. Like, I'll give the whites to my dog. So
I'm very curious about this. Yeah, I've wanted to try that same thing, but also I've been looking around. Have you? Is there anybody who makes an egg yolk product? Like, can you get cartoned
like not
egg yolks?
Beaters, but like just
the
yolk.
opposite of an egg beater.
Yeah,
that's the product that needs to be made, don't you think?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think they do. That's a good idea, though.
I think I saw one once in a sort of baking site.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But I would have felt like a weirdo ordering it.
I do have a preference for eggs that are from free-range chickens because the yolks do taste different.
Ducks also have huge yolks.
Yeah. I had access to eggs from free-range chickens kind of growing up in college, and the first time I had them, I was like, wow, these yolks are like orange, and they were really buttery and creamy. And so I will make an effort, so the whole nutrition thing, like GMO versus I don't get involved in that, but I just know that, grass-fed beef and eggs from free-range chickens, they do taste better to me. So I tend to seek them out at the store. But you can eat, pork fat. When you get on a ketogenic diet, it's really important to bump up your hydration, bump up your sodium, get in lots of fat, pork, beef fats, nuts, whipped cream. I get ice cream made with coconut cream, actually, and I have that every night. It's like a big fat bomb. And it's really important to like pump up the fat and get that going. But some people may have some GI issues with the fat initially, so you have to kind of titrate it in gradually. But my body always did really well with high fat, so I didn't have any problems adapting to it. But it's the fat that your own body fat and your dietary fat that's making the ketones. Right. So
now there's another element in this period, though. If this person is training in any capacity during those 2 weeks period, it sounds, or however long it takes for them, it sounds like that could also present some complications. What does somebody need to keep in mind about their training? And I know I've heard some people say like heart rate is a concern when you're adapting to fat adaptation versus glucose as well. I know there's a guy named Phil Maffetone who has a low carb system, and he says, no, you really, really have to watch your heart rate, because if it goes too high, then your body starts scrambling for glucose. Like what considerations does somebody need to have in their training?
If your heart rate's high, your heart rate can get elevated if you get on a ketogenic diet, if your blood volume drops. You kind of get tachycardia. Some people experience that. And that could be the hypovolemia, or kind of the natriuretic effect that you have, like your electrolytes could be not optimal. So I would suggest, maybe initially getting adequate magnesium. A magnesium supplement helped me prevent me from getting cramps. If I trained certain muscle groups, I would be prone to get cramps when I started the ketogenic diet. Magnesium in the form of glycinate or magnesium chloride would be what I would recommend. Potassium citrate, although like chicken and vegetables have adequate potassium. And heavily salt your food initially in the beginning, and make sure you have a lot of hydration. So I guess you're talking about high heart rate during exercise. Mm-hmm. So that would be kind of the activation of your sympathetic nervous system. When you activate your sympathetic nervous system, it tends to break down existing levels of glycogen in your liver. So you'll be kind of, stimulating the release of whatever glycogen you have. And sometimes post-exercise, you can get hypoglycemic. And that could be an issue for some people. I think it's those periods where you need to supplement with MCT. And I think, people ask me, well, if I am an MMA fighter, if I am a sprinter, if I'm doing this or that, can I, do the ketogenic diet? And I say you really just need to experiment with it. But you have to keep in mind that it's going to take months for you to adapt. Think about it. You're changing your whole metabolic physiology from a carbohydrate-based system to a fat and ketone-based system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that takes time. I didn't really get into my stride, so to speak, until about 6 months to a year after being in ketosis. But the benefits are really real, and I just was traveling for 4 weeks continuously in Southeast Asia, and there was some periods where it just didn't really have food because we were hiking and things like that, and I would have completely bonked. And because I was adapted, I was much more resilient against limited food availability too. So I think you really have to force your body to get through it to start getting the benefits. Mm-hmm. And everybody's going to be different, I think.
When you say you're more resilient, does that just mean you were not hungry? Is hunger just not a familiar sensation to you at a certain level of ketosis?
Yeah, the hunger doesn't control me. I control my appetite. So instead of, I remember in the past, I would just get really completely hungry and angry and just brain fog, where that doesn't happen. Actually, when I'm a little bit hungry, that's kind of when I feel my best mentally and most lucid. And that's the real world practical benefit, I think, of being adapted to the ketogenic diet. Now, whether, in our modern day society, food availability is not usually an issue, but I think, for me it is. Sometimes I get busy, I'm in the lab, in meetings, and I've several days I can remember in the past month or so, which I just could not eat. So I just didn't have that luxury. I was in kind of, in an environment in the animal vivarium where you're not allowed to have food or something, so that has definitely can help me. So
is that why you also, or correct me if I'm wrong, but you also do follow intermittent fasting to a point? You eat breakfast, you eat dinner, but typically during the day you don't eat much other than, coffee or drink that. Was one the byproduct of the other? So I'm a ketogenic dieter. I realize I'm not as hungry as much, or I don't want, I don't crave food. I don't need to devote half my day into making food and eating food. Or is there, or are there additional benefits to doing both ketogenic diet plus fasting or intermittent fasting?
Yeah, I think there's a benefit to getting your body into a state of hypoglycemia with elevated ketones. And doing that every once in a while definitely has some health benefits. And doing it on a daily basis, that's kind of subject for debate, whether or not that can confer long-term health benefits. I believe it can, just by looking at my blood work and just getting feedback from other people. I live my life kind of, I guess, going back to high school and college. I was definitely had an unhealthy preoccupation with food. I was pretty much an extreme ectomorph. So for me to gain size and strength, I had to eat every 2 2 to 3 hours on the clock. And I mean, I remember having like, nightmares about not being able to eat and just being hungry. And I had like chicken sandwiches in my side pockets of my khaki pants. And I was like pulling bars out and just kind of eating constantly. So it's very liberating not to be preoccupied with preparing food, eating food, cleaning up, and just sitting down and having a nice social kind of breakfast, which I do, and a nice kind of like social like dinner at night where you could just sit down and kind of eat whatever and not have to count macros and things. I pretty much know what I eat anyway. And from a practical point, I just get more done during the day, and I have more energy throughout the day if I don't stop and consume a meal. So if I consume a meal in the middle of the day, which I do sometimes, like we'll go out to lunch for the lab, or sometimes I'll eat, and it doesn't throw me off, but I just don't eat that much. If I was to eat a big meal in the middle of the day, like I do kind of at night, I wouldn't have the sustained kind of energy and focus that I typically have during the day, and that I try to use to my advantage to get as much done as possible. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and you hear people talk about that sustained focus a lot as a benefit of this. But when I talk to some people who try ketogenic dieting or fasting, they often say, "Yeah, it's great. ... with enough coffee," basically. Where does coffee fit into this? And caffeine? I mean, and how prevalent is appetite suppression in this approach? Do you think?
Wow, just as you said that statement, I was drinking coffee.
Exactly.
Wow, I swear. Coffee is, I think, has a ton of health benefits. It's like drinking a really potent antioxidant cocktail. So although I can do fine without it, but I enjoy it, and I think of it as like an MCT delivery system too. So I will put my powdered MCT in it with a little bit of stevia, and that's what I have in the morning. And then I put whatever I make in my my French press, I'll bring in my thermos to work, and then I'll pour it into a cup. And then sometimes I have, in the middle of the day, typically not after 4 p.m., I'll brew another small cup of coffee. But
okay, so there's some coffee definitely in the mix here.
Yeah. I don't like to be – I hate the idea of being sort of dependent on something.
Sure.
When we were traveling, actually, and maybe because just being outside and active and everything, I didn't have caffeine withdrawal. Maybe if I was at my desk, my office actually doesn't have any windows or anything, so I'm not like stimulated with light. But when I was traveling, I completely kind of got off coffee. And I forget where we were at just recently, like Cambodia, the middle of Southeast Asia or something. And we stopped in at some kind of specialty shop that had coffee, and it was like super strong. And I got a large coffee, and it had like the LD50 of caffeine in it, and and I drank it, and I survived. But I was just like super wired, like it just hit my brain, like I thought I was going to have a seizure or something. So your body becomes very sensitive if you kind of take caffeine and kind of go without it for a little bit. So you have to wean yourself back into it. But I think coffee has a lot of benefits health-wise, and the caffeine has been so well studied by the military. You pull all the military records on caffeine, and that's why they incorporate it into their, all the guys are, on lots of caffeine.
Sure.
Yeah.
You said something else interesting a little while ago, and you said, when you were a younger man, you had to eat to great excess because you were put on any sex because you were an ectomorph. Knowing what you know now about fuel systems and how all these things work, do you think that if somebody is looking to add even just a little bit of muscle, that they have to sort of eat in that unrestrained way, or is there a way to do both of these together where you can add a little functional muscle and still be something near to one of these systems that you're describing, fasting or ketogenic?
Yeah, good question. Instead of like 6 or 7 meals a day, I could have easily, the energy density of fat is much higher, right? So I could have easily taken out all the rice and the pasta and bread from my diet and put in more healthy fat sources, and backed off from 6 to 8 meals a day to 4, and probably grew the same way. And I looked at some of the blood work I had. So when I was 1920, I felt bloated all the time. I was gassy. I had like acne, and I think I could have reduced or just eliminated all that by being on a higher fat, lower carb diet. So I think the ketogenic diets have a profound anti-inflammatory effect. And I think things like, I think there's even like a publication out there, the ketogenic diet for acne, or definitely for inflammatory disorders. We published a Nature Medicine paper on the NLRP3 inflammasome. So, and that pathway is activated with a lot of chronic inflammatory disorders. So I think I could have made the same gains and probably not put on as much fat as I did when I was trying to bulk up, and I probably could have did it in a more healthy manner instead of literally force feeding bananas and pasta and bread.
I kind of want to. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. You can finish what you were saying before I jump to the next thing.
Oh yeah, I went back and looked at some of the dietary records, and I was easily getting like 500-600 grams of carbs a day.
Wow.
So back at that time. So I would be interested or curious to what would happen to my body if I tried that again. Definitely would need to adapt to it.
All right. I'm going to change subjects a little bit here because there's something that I do want to talk about. Make sure we have time to talk about it. Are exogenous ketones or ketone supplements. Starting to see more of them, hear more about them. I have a ton of questions on them, but I guess just to start simple, what are they? And how do they work? So my guess is they are not a means so that I can eat pizza and take these ketones and then somehow magically still be in ketosis. So not necessarily a way to reverse or compensate for eating carbs or a higher protein diet that would then, could elicit an insulin response. So what are they? How do they work?
Okay. So exogenous ketones, I stumbled across this, that these were being produced and have been around for quite some time. And they completely circumvent the need for dietary restriction to put you into a state of ketosis. And for our purposes, it was therapeutic ketosis for controlling seizures. So they essentially are a ketone molecule or a precursor to a bioidentical ketone molecule that when it's consumed, the ketones are liberated into the bloodstream. And they are elevated and are used by your brain and your heart and peripheral tissues. So if, for example, I was to take a ketone ester, which we have done the most of our research in our lab has been on ketone esters. If I'm on a high carb diet and I would consume a ketone ester within 15 minutes to 30 minutes, if you looked at my blood, it would look like I fasted for a week if I took, a pretty hefty dose of it. And a physiologist that would, take a blood sample would be convinced that I had just fasted for a week. So not only does it elevate blood levels of ketones, beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, but it also, large boluses of exogenous ketones also lower blood glucose. And we don't know why that's happening, but it's become a really important aspect of our research. It seems to reduce hepatic glucose output, but more importantly, what I think the exogenous ketones are doing are enhancing insulin sensitivity. So it actually assists with the transport and utilization of glucose into tissues. How it's doing that, we don't know. We're looking at perhaps activation of pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, PDH, enhancing the insulin receptor, facilitating glucose transport in some way. So there's ketone esters. You take a ketone molecule and you can combine it with a lot of different molecules out there, like glycerol or 1,3-butanediol or various things, so that when it's consumed, the ester bond is broken by esterase enzymes, and that ketone molecule is liberated to be used. So, and then you have what you see pretty common on being commercialized right now is ketone salt products. So a ketone salt, the ones that are out there, are beta hydroxybutyrate, and they are combined with monovalent or divalent cations, which could be sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, typically are the ones out there. So it's a simple ionic bond between the ketone molecule and the mineral, and when they're consumed, the mineral is liberated from the ketone, and the ketones get into circulation. They can be very efficient fuels for the heart and the brain, and if it's combined with different fats, you can slow the absorption. I think there's products out there by Ketogenics, by Prove It, Forever Green. There's different companies out there developing this. These technologies actually were developed kind of in our lab, the mixtures of the salts. So I think they have incredible application. I think the products that are actually out there right now have not been tested in our lab. So the actual product. So the formula that's incorporated in some of these products have been, tested in our lab for efficacy, for quickly elevating and sustaining ketosis. But what I'm interested in doing is actually, working with the companies to do very specific pharmacokinetic studies, performance enhancement studies with their actual products to make sure they're of their purity and their potency. So that's what we're kind of in the process of doing. We're negotiating with these companies to do that, and it's nice because these companies, unlike some other companies out there, they're really sincere about, they want to create the best product they can. So they seem pretty sincere about supporting the research that's necessary to further develop and validate their product.
So sort of speaking to this athletic population, sort of the athlete of the future who's wondering, like, okay, yeah, what is the athletic keto supplement or a ketone supplement going to look like? When am I going to take it? What do you envision? Like, is this a ketone pre-workout that somebody could be taking, or is it something they're sipping on during the day, or what do you see happening down the road?
It's a good question. I think when your body is fat and keto adapted, it will more efficiently transport and utilize ketones as an energy source for your brain and your heart. So I think you'll probably get more benefits from a ketone supplement if you're low carb. Mm-hmm. But that's some of the work that was done with the monoester of beta hydroxybutyrate from Richard Veitch's lab at the NIH, and the research was done at Oxford University, and it looked at elite level rowers, and they were not on a ketogenic diet. They were primarily on a carbohydrate-based diet. When they took a dose of the ketone ester, it enhanced power output significantly, and that's I'm not sure that's published, but it's in the patent reports. So there's a little bit of discussion too about the form of the ketones that are being sold currently. So there's racemic ketones, which are the D and the L, or the R and the S enantiomer. So if you look at your hands, right, you know how there's L amino acids and D amino acids, and there's L-lysine and L-arginine. And if you were to have a steak out of a D amino acid, you probably wouldn't absorb it and utilize it very efficiently. But that really does not seem to be the case with ketones. So if you have the R or D, depending on what kind of chemistry, how you characterize it, form is the physiological form of ketone that our body makes. And the salts that are being sold are racemic. So there's the R and the S, or the D and the L, that are being sold. And the other enantiomer actually breaks down to acetyl-CoA and can interconvert back to the physiological enantiomer, the R. And there was a podcast, I think, on Dr. Veitch did a podcast on Bulletproof Radio, I think, and just talked about the racemic salts that are being sold out there right now are ineffective and dangerous. But that's really not the case. Because there's you could just look for various disorders. For MAD is a disorder it's an inborn error of metabolism, where they gave kids even very high doses of racemic salts, the same salts that are being sold, and it not only managed their disorder, but had no side effects. So we know that the racemic salts, I know there's been a big safety issue going on, but there's a mountain of safety data, even showing the efficacy of some of the salts that are out there. Even the sodium salt. So even taking a large dose of sodium, I think sodium has been demonized, but it's probably more important if you're in a state of ketosis, because we talked about when your ketones are elevated, typically you're excreting more sodium. So you definitely need to bump up sodium a little bit, especially initially. So the sodium salts that are out there, if you're trying to be the best athlete you can, what I would recommend is taking them pre-workout and intra-workout to fuel your workouts, especially if you're already low carb. Mm-hmm. And if you are on a high carb diet, there's pretty good evidence to suggest that it enhances insulin sensitivity and it enhances glucose disposal. Ketones do. So, and this is very obvious in our studies. If we administer by mouth a ketone supplement, the blood glucose reliably goes down and then comes back up. It almost has the inverse pharmacokinetic profile of the ketones. So as ketones go up, you get this hypoglycemic effect. So it's actually facilitating and enhancing glucose disposal. So that would almost like taking a little bit of insulin before you work out. Mm-hmm. So actually pushing more glucose into the cells, into the skeletal muscle.
So with that being said, when do you know you've gone overboard? When do you know you've taken too many ketones or the higher dose?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, I think with the products that are out there now, that's highly unlikely because you'll have GI issues way before you'll have ketoacidosis.
So that's your warning system.
Yeah. So your GI. So, for example, like if you take too much medium chain triglyceride MCT oil, you'll have disaster pants, right? So we know this.
That's my
but
band
in the
name.
Future, it's a great name.
Thank you.
But as these technologies advance, and then you can develop ketone salts also out of alkaline amino acids. So you could envision a ketone salt that has a spectrum of monovalent and divalent cations, and then a kind of like a panel. They're combined with a number of different amino acids. So they could be formulated into a drink that's tolerable and palatable, and it could put your ketone levels very high. That's not the state right now. So the technology is not kind of evolved to that point now. But with ketone esters, it's a very real possibility, but they taste horrible. So you need to consume. They need to be diluted into a mixture where you probably have to drink up to a half a liter to a liter or more. So you have to consume a pretty high amount. So ketoacidosis has been thrown around a lot, and some people say the ketogenic diet could be dangerous because you risk diabetic ketoacidosis. But it's important to recognize that that's a metabolic derangement specifically associated with the absence of insulin, as it would apply to a type 1 diabetic. So without your body's ability to produce insulin, you have runaway ketogenesis. So your liver will just keep pumping out ketones if you don't make insulin. With that said, I think a ketogenic diet could be a great option for a type 1 diabetic because it reduces their need and their reliance on insulin. So if you can get a type 1 diabetic to use 10 IUs of insulin instead of 80 IUs of insulin, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, they don't go into ketoacidosis only if they were to become dehydrated or undergo some kind of physiological stress. So as far as safety is concerned, with the supplements, you would have to consume, a lot of it, too much of it, to really put yourself into a state of the levels of ketones that you would need to be in a state of ketoacidosis with normal blood glucose or low blood glucose would be about 8 to 10 millimolar. Then you'll start to get into kind of the danger zone. And currently the products on the market barely get you to like 1 millimolar. So you're magnitudes of orders away from the potential even to get into ketoacidosis.
So when people talk about, oh, this is my keto life, this is what it feels like online, you hear about two benefits. Primarily is what I see. People talk about, body composition benefits, and they talk about how they feel, this sort of feeling of mental clarity. Do you feel like ketone supplements have potential to be of value to that person who isn't a high level athlete, isn't somebody who is looking for it in a therapeutic setting, isn't type 1 diabetic, but just thinks, I'd love to be a little bit leaner, I'd love to feel good during the day and not have this up and down blood sugar roller coaster. I don't really want to eat super low carb. I want to eat reasonably, but if I took this supplement along with it, I could have some of the ketogenic diet benefits. Do you think that person might benefit from this?
Yeah, I think they may benefit the most, kind of like your average everyday person, even like, the business executive who just wants to have steady, more or less fuel flow to the brain in your body throughout the day. And when you're on a ketogenic diet, that's really the benefit, is that your glucose and your hormones are pretty much stable throughout the day. So you have this sustained focus and energy, and that can come in handy, if you don't want your glucose to drop right before kind of a meeting, or you have to write a paper or something like that, or get some kind of report in. So I know kind of if I'm following a ketogenic diet and I'm going into a pretty demanding day at work, I know that my energy is going to be sustained throughout the day, and my focus will be sustained. And I think in the beginning, it may be a little rough, and maybe you'll be drinking more coffee or whatever to get you through periods of glucose withdrawal that your brain is going through. But once you're adapted, the benefits are really, really pronounced, I think, for most people. And then you get people that the ketogenic diet can just be difficult for them to follow. There's some people who just can't tolerate the high fat, of the diet. Some people can't tolerate MCT at all. And also, once you get keto adapted, like very subtle variations can make a big difference for some people. There's some people that even a little bit of carbs can throw them off, and then they start getting kind of hypoglycemic responses. But I'm not one of those people, but I think some people are like that. And, other people have kind of commented, there's women who have concerns about hormonal alterations, with carbohydrate restriction. And I think females, their physiology tends to be reactive to stressors. And if they become hypoglycemic and they start a ketogenic diet, it can throw maybe their hormonal balance off a little bit. So this needs to be studied. I get this question asked a lot. Like, if I'm a woman and an athlete, can I follow a ketogenic diet? Just from the observations that I've made in the lab with students and everything, when some of them will just try fasting, like basically more than half of the women have been unable to fast. Whereas the guys, I don't know if it's an ego thing or what, but they kind of chalk it up and grit through it. But I mean, some of the women, they'll just faint. They'll have, it'll be really difficult for them to power through the carbohydrate restriction or fasting. So I think men just tend to be hardwired for that a little bit better. And I think that needs to be studied, especially if women are interested in using a ketogenic diet for weight loss or health benefits or performance enhancement. And now we are actually doing studies. The National Institutes of Health, the NIH, is actually requiring investigators to do male and female. So maybe it's not known in the general community, but like all scientific research, almost all of it is done in males, because if you study females, they have the estrous cycle and it gives more variability to your data. So for years, investigators have been, they'll buy male mice or male rats, but now the NIH realized, well, women are important, I guess. So now we use male and female animals in our experiments. It makes things more expensive because we need more animals, but we are starting to get more information now on the effects of nutritional ketosis on females, and that's really important.
Yeah. Why are women so complicated?
I don't know. Yeah, I just say they're just more variable.
That's the nice way to put it.
So this this person that we're talking about, who's kind of a normal person with normal diet, normal goals, very, very normal, would they see the same benefit from just adding a bunch of MCTs to their diet as they would from taking an exogenous ketone supplement?
Yeah, they would see some benefits for sure, but I don't think they would get optimal benefits unless they were kind of low carb, really. I think when you're adapted to low carb, you become keto adapted. So I think it's assisting with the transport and utilization of the ketones that the MCT is making. So that's my hypothesis, but we haven't really studied that. So I'm just kind of speculating based on feedback. But regardless, I don't think a clinical type strict ketogenic diet is probably a good idea for athletes out there, but a modified ketogenic diet that's supplemented in some way with ketogenic fats, and that could be coconut oil, MCT, or the C8 oil. Perillo Nutrition makes one. Keto Sports makes the C8. Dave Asprey sells Brain Octane, that's C8. So there's a couple versions of the powerful, kind of more or less you can think about it as the most ketogenic MCT out there. And that's really beneficial. I mean, you can get your ketones up. I can get up to about 2 millimolar, which is pretty high, relatively speaking, with just an MCT. And you feel that. That's like especially if you're in a fasted state and you take a dose of MCT, I mean, you feel it kind of hit your brain.
Really?
You feel the real world. Yeah, you don't have to, it's not hard to convince someone. Once your body is kind of hungry and you take an MCT or ketone supplement, you can feel it, the effects.
Yeah, there it is. my brain.
And I think it's actually further enhanced with a little bit of caffeine. So, and that's something that we want to do research on, is start formulating these things so you have kind of like various types of exogenous ketones in a formula with various cofactors that help the cell transport and utilize them more efficiently, and then maybe some mild stimulants that could further augment sort of the bioenergetic energy producing effects of the ketones. So I have various things on paper that we're formulating and we want to test. And, it's mostly for military applications, but hopefully, you can envision sort of bodybuilding supplements coming out, that are formulations of this.
I want to touch on real quick, any possible preventative effects of either the diet or supplementation, ketone supplementation. So for someone like myself, or I would say a lot of people, we may not be dealing with seizures ourselves, or I may not be necessarily a bodybuilder who is using this diet to get lean or trying to improve my body composition. Is there any other reason why this diet or lifestyle would be beneficial? Because I believe I've heard you talk about or mention before some protective effects on the brain for possible brain injury. And I could be completely wrong, so please just stop me when I am wrong. Or if there's any benefit, let's say I have cancer that runs in my family. Is there a benefit of me taking the step ahead and getting on the diet or getting on supplementation and potentially reducing any increased risk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so just going back to brain health, I'm really a believer that your brain health your long-term brain health has a lot to do with inflammation. So we know from the scientific literature, anything that's healthy for your heart is going to be healthy for your brain, right? And we know that the work from Richard Veitch's lab, who is a student of Hans Krebs, the Krebs cycle,
Yes.
he did some elegant studies showing that ketones enhance, ATP production and reduce free radical production in the heart in a working perfused heart preparation. So you generally get more ATP per oxygen molecule consumed, up to like 25-30% more. And we published a study. Actually, I formulated the diet with a ketone ester, and the study was run by Deep Dixit at Yale University, looking at the effects of inflammation on cancer. So, Dr. Dixit at Yale did a lot of remarkable work on the effects of fasting, and fasting reducing various inflammatory pathways. And he found that just simply elevating ketones suppressed an inflammation pathway associated with chronic illnesses. And it did it in a metabolic independent mechanism, which means the ketones were functioning purely as a signaling molecule, independent of the known metabolic pathways, which is very interesting to me because it's very interesting that these exogenous metabolites actually have drug-like effects. They function as class 1 and 2 histone deacetylase inhibitors, HDAC inhibitors. And the pharmaceutical companies are all over developing these HDAC inhibitors for Alzheimer's, for cancer especially. So, and it just makes sense, right? These exogenous metabolites that our body makes have important signaling properties. So as it pertains to brain health, being in a state of nutritional ketosis will provide an alternative energy substrate for your brain that will likely enhance bioenergetic function in the brain cells. That's been established pretty well in animal models and in vitro and in vivo. It will lower inflammation, and chronically keeping inflammation low will probably pay big dividends as we age. So I think chronic inflammation, you could probably trigger the formation of amyloid and tau plaques, right? With chronic inflammation. That happens with concussions, right? So repeated concussions or subconcussive events, which can happen during football, can contribute to the formation of amyloid and tau plaques, which are the pathological hallmark for Alzheimer's disease. So yes, I think being in a state of ketosis could be prophylactically protecting the brain. And we know that cancer, as it pertains to cancer, being in a state of nutritional ketosis requires suppression of the hormone insulin and low blood glucose and high ketones, right? So insulin, if you already have cancer, which most people do in some way, shape, or form, our immune system has pretty good checkpoints to deal with precancerous cells. And cancer develops very slowly over time. It's not that it's just spontaneously forms, so we are cancering, it's like a verb, really. So if we do a therapeutic fast or we follow a nutritional protocol that puts us into nutritional ketosis, and we do what's called a glucose ketone index, which is the glucose in millimolar over ketones in millimolar. And Thomas Seyfried has wrote a paper on this. And we basically, for simplicity, we get our ketone levels up to the level of our blood glucose. And if we do that, 2 or 3 times a year, I think we could potentially purge ourselves from existing cancer or precancerous cells that we have. And I think, it's my theory, and other people could theorize this, is that could be a very effective preventative approach to a lot of different diseases, especially cancer.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to ask you about as well. It's so easy to think of this as a lifestyle, but what about a sort of a periodic reset 2 to 3 times a year? Do you think that's something that's going to have value as well?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It's been shown by investigators like Mark Mattson at the National Institutes of Health that intermittent fasting or even periodic fasting can have long-term health benefits, even from an epigenetic standpoint. So we have the acute effects, right? We have a profound decrease in inflammation, elevation of blood ketone levels, suppression of hormone insulin, things like that. But that can activate a genetic program that can confer protection against a plethora of chronic illnesses. And I think doing that periodically could be very beneficial. Say, when cancer cells are healthy cells that gradually transform to what's called a Warburg phenotype. A Warburg phenotype is basically the cells are fermenting in the presence of oxygen. So they continue to ferment and they suck up massive amounts of glucose and in some cases glutamine too. Doing a therapeutic fast or getting into nutritional ketosis would lower their preferred fuel source and elevate the fuel source that they can't use, right? And that would put tremendous metabolic stress on these precancer cells, and they would likely trigger what's called apoptosis, programmed cell death. If a cancer cell cannot meet its energy needs, it activates a pathway that causes the cancer cell to basically spontaneously die. We call that apoptosis. And they're very sensitive. Even a tumor that's growing healthy, there's all sorts of necrotic and apoptotic cells inside the tumor itself. You can cut it open and see it. So that's, the cancer is a very complex topic, and it's genetically very heterogeneous, but it has the same metabolic phenotype. At least 90% of the cancers do. So it has a very high appetite for glucose, and the growth and proliferation of cancer is driven by the hormone insulin and IGF-1, and that's suppressed when you do the therapeutic fasting and nutritional ketosis. So I think that's definitely could be a beneficial thing for people to periodically do short-term fasting, or maybe periodically just do intermittent fasting, or just the ketogenic diet. So there's different approaches that they could take.
Yeah, and you see many different approaches online where people say, "Oh yeah, once a week or once a month you do it for." There's one I saw a lot of attention on recently. Once a month for 3 days, you basically have broth and have a little modified fast. Do you think it needs to be that often, or can somebody do it? Hey, you know what? It's New Year's. I'm going to fast my annual fast and actually see any benefits from that.
I think it becomes more important as we age, right? Because as we age, these things, it's kind of inevitable. These chronic illnesses tend to creep up on us. And I think our carbohydrate tolerance decreases with age. So it's probably a good idea to transition more into low carb as we age into this kind of eating lifestyle. When you're 19 and your early 20s, your carbohydrate tolerance is so high, unless you have type 2 diabetes in your family or you're an obese child, you generally, especially if you're a young athlete, can tolerate carbs really well and probably doesn't need to do this. But as we age, I think it's a good way to stave off chronic illnesses that tend to creep up, and especially inflammation. And that's probably the biggest thing that I see. And even gut health. I don't know. The ketogenic diet is kind of like an elimination diet too, right? Because you're eliminating some foods that could be problem foods. But I get several emails every single day about how the ketogenic diet restored a person's gut health or decreased inflammation associated with their gut. So I think that's a real thing that needs to be studied. What the ketogenic diet does to the gut microbiome is something that we need to study too.
Okay, and from an athlete's perspective, what else do you think we need to study next? What do you think is exciting that's happening in that direction?
Well, I think from a basic science point of view, we need to determine how nutritional ketosis impacts metabolic physiology. We need to do metabolic card studies and understand how the fuel source changes with time. From the initiation, you take carb burning athletes and put them on a ketogenic diet, and you measure week 1, 2, 3, all the way out to, if it was unlimited funding, all the way out to 6 months, and find out how their body, the rates of their keto adaptation, and how that changes, and even do a genetic kind of profile on them with 23andMe to determine what SNPs may be preventing keto adaptation or enhancing it, and what athletes may benefit most. So it'd be good to study endurance athletes, sprinters, and then power athletes, like power lifters. Of course, this is all great in a world where there's unlimited funding, but the military does have a pretty keen interest in transitioning their guys in understanding the benefits of the ketogenic diet. I know the Defense Science Board put in a recommendation, it's at the level of the president essentially, put in a recommendation to look at ketones and low-carb diets for the military. And I've given talks at NATIC, and I've given talks to the military, and they're serious about doing this, but there's some entrenched dogma that they need to overcome before that happens.
Well, and there is a world of unlimited experiments out there happening online every day. It seems like you see, every type of athlete has a keto discussion happening online, but the problem, of course, being anything that can happen online can be totally butchered.
Right.
What would be your parting words maybe to that person online, like, here's how you can stop butchering the ketogenic diet?
Okay, are you talking about people that are like promoting it or kind of dissing it, or both?
I would say promoting it.
Promoting it, but not for what it really is. For example, I see a lot about keto cycling, or where you're keto for a week and on the weekend you eat the carbs again, or you come back to it. So just a lot of misinformation, I guess. Is what we see a lot of. Probably some of it's good. And I'm also interested. I imagine if you look around online at the keto casual literature online, you probably see something every once in a while and go, dude, that's not keto. I don't know what you think you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's, first and foremost, people need to be educated if they want to give this an honest try. Jeff Volek has a great book, Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance. It's kind of like a go-to book. It's like mandatory reading for like students that come to my lab. I think it's really important to check your ketone levels. A lot of people do this process and they don't check their ketone levels, or they don't even track their macros. So there's this kind of a misunderstanding that if I do the ketogenic diet, I don't have to track my macros. I could just eat this and I'll be in ketosis or whatever. I think, especially for a person who's serious about their fitness, is to track their macros with a simple app, or just write it down on paper or whatever. And then once you do that, you don't have to be obsessive about it, but you understand kind of. Like right now, I can kind of look at a meal and kind of calculate the macros in my head. So you don't have to go around with a calculator. But it's really, a lot of people, when they start the ketogenic diet, because it's so energy dense, they underestimate actually how many calories they're eating. They'll sit down in front of the TV with a big tub of cashews and like eat it. I'm eating ketogenic or whatever, or macadamia nuts. They don't realize it. They just, it takes a while for your stomach to tell your brain that, you've just eaten a lot of calories. So you can pack away a lot of fat pretty fast. So it's really important to kind of if you're going to set up your meal, to like set aside X amount of food and not, force feed yourself a ketogenic diet. You need to pay attention. You don't throw calories out the window or macronutrients out the window. A lot of people think you don't have to calculate that. And if you do the cyclic ketogenic diet, it should be in a calculated way, not a free-for-all, all-you-can-eat carbs on the weekends, because that can do a lot of damage. You need to have it like sort of calculated and do more of like a slow carb approach, be kind of picky about the kind of carbs that you're consuming preferentially, and just, not an all-you-can-eat sugar frenzy, because you could do a lot of damage as far as taking in excess calories if you don't have some kind of control over it. I mean, I remember years ago being on a restrictive diet and then giving myself like a cheat day or a cheat meal. You can consume like person can consume. I've seen a person consume about 7,000 to 8,000 calories, I think, in one meal.
Oh yeah.
You know,
You
when
do
they've
a lot
come
of
off
damage on that thing.
Yeah. And they don't realize it.
Feel
You know?
terrible.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, it's really unhealthy. And so if people are doing the cyclic ketogenic diet and then call it a cheat meal or cheat day, I think they should calculate, you know, how much they're going to eat and be pretty not restrictive, but a little more reserved in kind of their carbohydrate feedings. And understand too that if your liver glycogen's topped off, it's going to take you about 2 or 3 days to get back into producing ketones naturally again. So that gap in time may be a good opportunity to use ketone supplementation. As far as you're probably less likely to feel the effects of hypoglycemia. But if your liver glycogen's topped off, you probably won't go hypoglycemic, right? So, but it does take a while for you to get the benefits of ketones again after you've given yourself significant carbohydrate feeding.
Okay, good. I think that's a great place to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much for talking with us. I feel like, that was a great takeaway at the end there.
Absolutely.
Great to be on. Glad you guys are covering this topic. So I get a lot of, probably most of my emails I get are from the fitness community. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place for this topic to grow too, sort of organically in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, great. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Dom.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.